Hi everyone, welcome back to See the Invisible, Living with an Invisible or Rare Disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences and my thoughts on issues that those who have an invisible illness, a rare illness, chronic illnesses as well, and a lot of times they do overlap, but share, my opinions and experiences, how it relates to those types of illnesses. So the illness that I have falls into all three of those categories. So I look at and read a lot of articles, just trying to find ways to better manage my illness, manage, insurance issues, things that I feel are really important to know, as well as acknowledging the role of a caregiver in relation to someone who has an illness. And a caregiver may not always be someone who's with you 24/7 doing everything for that person. A lot of times it's just being there a little bit extra to show support for the person you love, to be able to provide an ear to listen to, or an extra pair of hands when needed. It really just, kind of depends on the illness and at what stage you are in that illness. But the caregiver is someone who's a very important person in our lives. That's what our topic will be about today, caring for the caregiver. Last week, I did start probably a 3-part, maybe it's going to be a 2-part, we'll see how long this runs, but possibly a 3-part series on caring for the caregiver. So if you are new to the podcast, you may want to go back and listen to at least the episode prior to this, as it gives some of the things that may stress a caregiver, such as, having to take the extra time during the day where it's almost like a full-time job, trying to handle things about insurance or, keeping up with the different medical appointments, and then just trying to do their normal daily activities such as, grocery shopping, dishes, things like that, as well as be a part of other people's lives, such as if they're a parent, if they have a job that's really time consuming, having to do all of those as well as being there as an extra support for someone with an illness. I will say, and you would hear this too if you had listened to the previous podcast, that my husband is amazing at this. I had not been diagnosed when we met, and at any point he may have just said, I did not sign up for this, because we were engaged for a very long time. We have a son that's 12, and he and I actually just got married in October of 2019. So that kind of goes to show you that we were together for a long time. And even though we weren't married, he would still tell me when I would feel down or think I was being a burden to him, that he didn't sign up for it. And he would just say, for better, for worse, in sickness and health, that I mean that. And he did. And so I've been really, really lucky with that, as well as having, a pretty large family that's there as a support. But in order to both have the caregiver there for us, and also to reflect that we understand that it's a big role that the caregiver is stepping into, and we appreciate it, we do have to acknowledge that they do have stressors related to, whatever role they play in, our illness. So I will be continuing with that today. Like I said, you may want to go back and listen to the previous episode, because I talk a little bit more about the actual stressors and just kind of summed it up a minute ago. And before I do get started, I always do want to say that I am in no way a medical, legal, or insurance expert. That if you do have any questions or concerns in any of those areas, please make sure that you're reaching out to the appropriate person. This podcast is not meant to be any type of medical, insurance, or legal advice. It's just me sharing opinions and experiences either on topics that I think are important or articles that I've read. Now, before I get started, too, I also want to mention or talk about something that I don't really discuss a lot during the podcast, but it's regarding how viewable a podcast is to others, making sure that other people can find it. So I'm just going to ask a couple of things if you would like to do this. First, for some reason, Facebook will not let me boost a post. That means it'll make it viewable to viewable for more people. And recently, I went to do that for last week's episode, and it told me that I was not able to do that because they needed to verify my identity. I had to upload a copy of my driver's license, which, don't really think should be necessary for Facebook, but they do. The review, according to the FAQs, could take up to 45 days, and then I have to submit a review for the actual suspension of the boost. So, episodes that I think are important in regards to reaching more people, I'm not able to boost. So, if you can share the link to this podcast on your social media, just to try to get the information out to others that they're not alone, that they do have support, that their voice is just as important as anyone else's. That's the whole goal of the podcast. I say the word positivity a lot, but that's what it really is. I want as many people as can. I'm sorry, I can't even speak. This is all kind of ad lib off the cuff discussing this, but I just want others to feel some positivity and hope. I know this past week has been kind of hard because of the mask mandates being lifted and seeing a lot of things on social media. I think it's a good time for people to feel like they matter, that they have a voice, they are being heard. And, again, that's the reason why I started the podcast. So if you do enjoy what you're hearing, please share the podcast. Also, if you're on a platform where you can rank or rate or leave a comment about the podcast, that also helps make it more visible within that podcatcher's search. So, if someone were to type in visible, it puts it, this one a little bit higher up on the list so people can see it. So if you just feel so inclined, please please share that on any of your social media platforms. Leave a like, subscribe, anything like that. That'll make it a little bit more viewable. So I would really, really appreciate that. Also, just one more thing before we really start getting into the actual meat and bones of the podcast. I know that at least where I live, the mask mandate has been lifted if it says that you're vaccinated. Unfortunately, I did see a lot of people in my community posting that they were going to lie about being vaccinated, but also not wear the mask. I know that masks are not 100% effective. I don't think that's the cure-all or anything like that. But at the same time, I understand, especially for those who do have a compromised immune system, even if they've had the vaccine, we want to be vigilant. We can only really take care of ourselves and make sure that, we are taking the precautions. We don't know what the other person is doing. Fortunately, though, I did see that most people are still wearing the masks in my area, and the stores themselves, their employees are wearing masks. So that does help out. But just as things kind of get back to where the mask mandates or possibly capacity levels in certain buildings have been lifted, please make sure that you're just taking the precautions to try to best protect yourself. Okay, now getting back to the topic of the podcast, caring for the caregiver. I ended last week with just talking about some suggestions that would help reduce, the stress for the caregiver and what they're going to. I really summed it up in some ways as the caregiver needs to feel empowered. They need to feel like they're active in your care because another thing I did mention too is that sometimes the caregiver is actually invisible as well. That if other people don't really see our illness, then they won't see the role that the caregiver is playing. So sometimes, that person needs to feel the confidence and that they know the best ways to help you. If they don't feel empowered, then, there's going to come times where they're feeling rather frustrated. So one of the things was just make sure you plan. If you're going to go out somewhere, make sure that any medications are addressed, whether you need to take them with you, things like that. And again, this is just kind of a quick recap on where we ended last week. And make sure that you and your caregiver, you have a good open line of communication, that the caregiver is a good listener on what you need. And sometimes it may be just kind of a repetition where he or she, repeats what you said to make sure they understand it properly. One of the things I know I'm guilty of is you hurt the ones that you love. And this, I think, is kind of, in a lot of relationships, that when you're feeling frustrated or upset, that the person you really take it out on is the one closest to you. And that tends to be our caregiver as well. So we need to learn, again, to have that communication open so that they know what to expect from us, we know what to expect from them, and we both have a good understanding. Also, I can definitely relate to this, that I feel bad about the way that my illness has affected our lives, that one of the biggest concerns I have is medical bills, finances, the ability to work, all of those things. And, it's sometimes I'm really I'm self-accepting of that, that, I'm limited in some things, but there are other days where I feel just really frustrated about, really the way things are. I'm sure none of us ever expected at some point to be dealing with a long-term illness. And I feel bad sometimes that he's not really where he expected to be in life. He's a little bit older than me, so he's approaching retirement age. Honey, if you're listening, we won't talk about that. But, he's very active and he's just a very strong person. So probably if you continue to listen to the podcast, you'll hear me give him glowing and raving reviews that, I'm so fortunate to have him. And so that's really where I ended. So I'm going to include some links kind of covering what I have already mentioned, and all of my source information will be listed in the description of the podcast. So one of the ways that someone needs to feel empowered is actually having a knowledge of what the disease entails or the illness that your loved one has. Having a better understanding about the illness can help in a number of ways. First, if you do happen to be in the appointment with your loved one, understanding what the doctor is saying will help you better understand the treatments that they're suggesting and how it will affect your loved one. It also helps you understand your loved one on a level regarding the illness that you may not otherwise know, especially when dealing with an invisible illness. Sometimes it's hard to describe exactly how you're feeling. So, having your loved one, the caregiver, that's there to help you, have a better understanding of the illness. They'll know your exact feelings. At least on the intellectual level, they may not be able to feel them themselves, but they will understand better what you're going through. It also will give them the ability to be able to discuss things with both yourself and your healthcare provider, rather than just going to an appointment and sitting there. They can play an active role in your treatment, and the physician will also know and see that you have that support system. It will also help them advocate for you, whether it's an ongoing issue, whether it's like with insurance or things like that. Having some knowledge about what you need will help them play a better and more confident role when dealing with your day-to-day needs. So I think we've all worked with insurance, and they're questioning why you might need a certain treatment or medication. So if they are working with the insurance company on your behalf, they'll have a better understanding there. So some ways to better understand about the illness. There's always information on websites. I would say be careful that it's not like a Wikipedia page. While it can be very, very informative on Wikipedia, it is something that people can add to. So you would want to go through known and trusted websites such as the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, your local hospital, if they have resources listed on their site, so that the caregiver can better understand. Using all the resources out there is a good way to do that. Also, if you do have a support group, I know the support group that I'm in with my illness does allow family members too. It's not just for those who have the illness, it's there for any family members or caregivers so that they can ask questions, because sometimes, someone with a chronic illness, they might not be able to, actually do that at that moment. So that gives another outlet and resource for your caregiver to go to. Also, check to see if there's any links on any pages that specifically deal with your illness, as well as going to sites such as the National Institute of Health websites, things like that. They might be able to have resources for you. And also, if you search NORD, N-O-R-D, that's the National Organization for Rare Diseases. They have a lot of resources on there, so that's a good source. And something else too, that even ourselves, as the person with the illness, we have to remember that not everybody with the same illness has the same symptoms at all times, has the same severity. So just as with many things in life, even if two people share an illness, the actual direction that it's taking is different with each individual. So make sure if you and your caregiver are working together on finding resources for them, make sure that it's really stressed that just because the article is mentioning these certain things, it may not always pertain to you, or it may always pertain to you. It just depends on what the article's focus is and what your individual symptoms are. So just make sure that the caregiver understands that too. The rarity of our illness also, can cause some concerns, because not every doctor has treated someone with these rare illnesses. So if the caregiver can be your voice sometimes, if you're seeing a new doctor, I know I go through this, I know that odds are they're not going to know about my illness. And I have taken papers with me at times to try to show a new doctor. They're not always receptive of that. So if you kind of want to have that voice, but maybe don't want to directly question the doctor, sometimes this is a good time for the caregiver to step in and say, I have these questions, I know that this is rare, what is your experience with this, and so forth. So that way both you and the caregiver can understand what this doctor has experience in, what they don't have experience in, and if it's something where, they don't really have any experience in that certain illness, that both you and the caregiver are asking questions about then what resources that are they using to try to assist you, or even seeing if you should maybe speak with a specialist or a different specialist, so that you'll be with someone who has more experience in the illness. Now, I've mentioned a couple times the caregiver being an advocate. A lot of times that does come down to not just the medical aspects, but what the rights of a patient are. As you may progress in an illness, sometimes it's necessary to apply for Social Security or disability. Have your caregiver understand what your rights are in regards to that, so they can better speak for you if that situation ever arises. And also, I mentioned insurance. We know that that's a common, problem sometimes, getting approvals. If you ever get to those points where you might need either a specialized treatment, you may be going into a stage where you need to apply for Social Security, make sure that the caregiver is, for one thing, authorized to speak on your behalf, that they're going to the Social Security website to try to find out what's needed and what the next steps are, that they're checking your insurance company's FAQs and coverage and benefits, so that they understand what your rights are there. Make sure that they do keep documentation of everything that's occurred, whether it's procedures, treatment plans, anything that pertains to the course that your specific illness is taking. And also understanding too, within that Social Security too, sometimes, depending on the age of your children, they could receive Social Security as well. You should also be informed on what the individual medical providers' quote-unquote patient bill of rights are. A lot of individual medical caregivers do have their own bill of rights. Like I mentioned before, keeping documentation. If you need anything, make sure that you're asking the doctor for the medical records, or I should say also your caregiver can ask that. So this is the importance of them being authorized as well. Also, something that I have utilized in the past with varying degrees of success is the patient advocate at hospitals. Depending on the actual role at the hospital, some hospitals do have those who can help with insurance questions. They can try to help you fill out forms for, say, work disability, or applying for any type of social services that you may need at the time. They may address any concerns that you have as a patient, whether it's in regards to your care, how you're being treated, and also how your family's being treated. So I know at my hospital they're kind of different. There's someone who's a social worker who will help you more with the, like applying for Social Security, disability. They'll try to coordinate any questions about the insurance and things like that. But a lot of times, at least at my hospital, it really comes down to them checking if you're eligible for a state, or if you're eligible for insurance through the state, or any other type of discounted insurance or discounts in regards to medication. And that's one person. And then there's also an advocate who works more on the medical side, such as concerned with how you were treated. Like I said, I've used a couple times. One was because as a new mother, we didn't have a diagnosis yet, but there was definitely something wrong. And I had a very hard hospital stay, and there really was not a room that could accommodate me. They did put me in a room for those who had disabilities, but however, while all the other rooms had a bed for the spouse or partner to sleep in, the one for the patients who are disabled did not have that. They had a chair. Navigation into the bathroom was more difficult, at least for me, but that was in the room for those who were disabled. So that kind of goes to show, too, that just because someone has a disability, it might not be the same for everyone. So the layout of that specific room was not really conducive for me. I also found that it was, how do I say this, absurd, I guess, that the rooms for patients without a disability, they had a bed for a partner to sleep in, whereas a room where someone might need a little bit of extra assistance or may need someone, to call the nurse's desk or go get them something, all they had was a chair. That did not make sense to me. It almost seemed like that particular hospital had a room that they labeled that to meet any requirements, because just speaking for myself and knowing what my mother may have gone through, since some of our symptoms in one condition that I have are very similar, it's just would not have been conducive. But that also too can help your caregiver understand. If they see that, they might know that, okay, this is not the room for them, and they can be a better advocate for you. So like I said, that didn't really work for me that time. When I got a call back, she said, well, we tried to accommodate you, but you refused the room. And I was like, yes, because it actually was more difficult for me to navigate. So, when it came down to it, I had to go to the other room, because it's like, okay, which one is the lesser of two evils? A room that really wasn't as comfortable, or a room that was absolutely out of the question for me. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what the advocates are supposed to do. Some advocates are wonderful and will go out of their way for you, but just make sure that either you or your caregiver, whoever is addressing it, has a strong voice and is confident in what you need. So these were some of the ways that the caregiver can try to cope regarding the illness. There are also some ways that they can cope personally. So it's like it's indirectly related to the illness. It's not regarding the treatment of the illness or the financial part of the illness. This is personal stress, ways to cope. So I think probably the most important is the recognition that sometimes the caregiver themselves need help. So I mentioned before that a lot of times the caregiver, they'll have work, they'll have their normal functions they have to do at home, like the dishes or laundry, be a parent, and they're taking on such a big burden. And sometimes I think some caregivers, if someone offers help, they feel like they have to say no, because they don't either want to impose on another person, or they feel that it's just their responsibility to be the caregiver towards their loved one. But a person needs time to themselves. They need to wind down. So if someone offers to maybe run an errand for you, if someone is able to drive your loved one to an appointment if you're not able to, and they're not able to drive, having a friend say, hey, I can do that for you, is okay. It just takes a little bit of stress off of the caregiver, and they have that time where where they are not trying to run from one place to the other, or trying to get too much done, and putting more pressure onto themselves. It's also necessary sometimes to understand what your loved one needs in regards to their care. So this kind of does in some ways go back to educating the caregiver, educating themselves on what you need. Knowing that can help them maybe recognize that a certain person has a different area of expertise, a friend might be able to lend some more help for something specific, and that way they're not shouldering that whole thing alone. Now, something too is they might want to hire someone if there's maybe a maid service or something like that. They might even want to consider doing that once a week or once a month, just again to take a little bit of pressure and time off themselves. A lot of times the caregiver will feel guilty if they can't accomplish every single thing that is needed by themselves, but we're only human. We're one person, so having a caregiver that really loves you and wants to take care of you is great. But also on the reverse side, we need to advocate for our caregiver. We need to let them know what's okay to delegate to someone else, and what you may need them specifically for, so they have that understanding and can reach out sometimes to get a little bit more assistance. Sometimes a caregiver may just need to talk to someone. There's a saying, which I know I'm not going to say it perfectly, but who counsels the counselor? So the caregiver does have all of these extra responsibilities. They may even be the person that we vent to. So there gets to be a time where they need to vent, that they need to speak with someone, whether it's, in person or, more recently, as things have started to be, more electronic, maybe a, online Zoom meeting, some type of support group that can help the caregiver. I mentioned before there's things like Facebook groups for certain things, and I like the idea of a support webpage that's not just for the patient but for their families, because that way there's a lot of open communication and it puts two eyes on the topic, not just yours or not just theirs. Now for the individual too, they can set certain goals for themselves. They themselves have to be healthy to help take care of you. A lot of times the person who is the caregiver doesn't get to take care of themselves as well as we would like, as they would like. So make sure that the caregiver is setting goals, such as making sure that they get a certain number of hours of sleep per night, that they're not shorting themselves on sleep because they're just, wearing themselves down. Make sure that you have time to, get the appropriate nutrition. I'm not just talking like a protein bar here or there, but that you're actually, partaking of things that really nourish your body and take care of you. And if you have any concerns as a caregiver, I know I keep saying you, but I'm talking as a caregiver, don't let your health go by the wayside. Make sure that, when you see your doctor, that you're talking to them completely, that you're talking to them in ways that you would if you were advocating for your loved one that has an illness, because that is something that you just don't want to take for granted. And as a caregiver, you can't take care of your loved one if you haven't taken care of yourself. So, it's just very important that you understand as a caregiver what your individual needs are. And we as the person with the illness understand that our caregiver has the same basic needs as we do. That they need a healthy diet, they need the right amount of sleep. Otherwise they're not going to be good for themselves, you, or any other family and friends. Now, I think I will end this with just a 2-part episode. We are at just a little over 31 minutes, but we should be able to get through the next few items rather quickly. Some ways that you can try to relieve stress, and I did take this from an article, so like I said, I will also link that. And previously, in the previous episode, I did mention that some pages and sources that I used are for specific illnesses, but while they may be specifically for one illness, the actual thoughts and meat and bones of the articles really pertain to a number of different illnesses. So at times you may see a link to a web page and think, well, that's not the illness that I have. That's true, but the tips that they provided are actually good for, a number of different people. And one article that I will be posting as well, it always says that, and then it has an acronym or an abbreviation. Just substitute that for caregiver. Right, so just some other stress relievers. Try to keep a journal. I myself don't really keep a journal per se, but I actually find that doing this podcast to express some of the things that I've learned through reading and research, it gives me my outlet. So in a way, it's like a journal, but audio. Before this, I would be the type of person, if I was upset and I needed to get something out, I would just type it up real quick like I was sending an email. And if I had sent some of those emails, that would have been bad. But I got all my feelings out. I felt better. I could breathe. And then I just deleted the draft. Trying to enjoy the weather. I'm going outside. I like this time of year when the birds are out, as long as they're not too early. Some people find exercise relaxing, so do that if you want to do that. Make sure again that you do have someone to talk to, but make sure it's not always like a counselor or a support group. Have your own circle of friends or a really good friend that you can talk to. Take time for entertainment, whether it's reading, watching a sitcom. Appreciate those things. Listen to your music. I do that when I'm driving. If I just need to get out for a few minutes, I will drive with my music blaring, or I might just sit there and sing a little bit or dance in my car. Take some time just to sit down, relax, put your feet up, and just appreciate the day. But don't let anything else around you stress you. Just kind of block everything out and use that time for complete relaxation. I also found a article called The 5 Caregiver Commandments, How to Support a Loved One with Invisible Illness. And, again, that will be linked. And the first commandment is to accept your powerlessness. So I know I've said be confident, be empowered. I know this in some ways kind of goes against it, but I think a better way for me, at least, to describe it is to accept the situation. And what that means is you specifically don't have any control over the illness as the caregiver. The patient doesn't either. The doctor, he's there to treat what the patient has, but even he can only do so much. He can only work through what the most current medical science is regarding that illness. So it's an accepting that your loved one has that illness and you can't physically take it away from them. So your role then going forward from there is to learn, as much about the illness so that you are able to confidently speak about it, but also be able to accept the fact that you can't change what has happened. We've already gone over taking time to learn about the illness. Also, the caregiver needs to understand that, the person with an illness sometimes just feels very crowded in, whether it's, like with the past year, not really being able to leave the house as much, or, this is one thing I've said to my husband. He doesn't need to be hovering around me all the time. And, sometimes we just need space as well because we spend our whole day, really that the illness is with us all the time. It's not something we can just push away. So sometimes we need some time to ourselves as the patient, and the caregiver needs to understand that. Make sure that you understand that your loved one who has an illness needs to feel that their their feelings are validated. So what that means is you're not just kind of shooing away what they're feeling at the time. I admit I've been guilty of this. If my husband had a toothache or something, and fortunately to that time I had not had any issues with, um, my teeth, but I really was not very empathetic. I know that's a minor issue, but it shows how, myself, I should have been a caregiver in that role, but I wasn't. I wasn't very supportive. So I've learned, that you really need to be there to tell them you understand that you may not have the illness, but you understand that your loved one is feeling this way or that way, whatever way they're expressing at the time, so that they feel like they're not alone. Try not to get frustrated, whether it's about the illness that your loved one has or about the actions of your loved one. And by actions, I don't necessarily mean the person who has the illness is, acting just as frustrated or not cooperating in some ways. But we have to all accept that, living with an illness, it's a full-time job. It's there 24/7. It, again, does not go away. So your caregiver is with you maybe 16 hours of the day, give or take, if they have a full-time job. If not, maybe about, really the whole day. So it's going to get frustrating, either from the fact that, as a caregiver, you want your loved one to be getting better quicker, or you're frustrated because you see that they're not progressing and getting better, but actually getting worse. If you're getting frustrated, that comes out in the way you speak. Again, between whether it's caregiver or patient, this can apply to both. When you get frustrated, that's relayed in your tone of voice, your actions, and the other person will pick up on it. And that may just cause a clash, that leads to hurt feelings, and nobody wants that. Everybody needs to feel supported in that relationship, and to get to a point where you're that frustrated that the two of you can't talk, in a nice, calm way, then, you need to find ways to help with the frustration, whether it's, any of the previous recommendations, such as, taking some time to read or listen to music. Understand when that sets in and that you need to take that time, because otherwise it is going to come to a boiling point and possibly end up, causing harm to the relationship. And it's something that, especially the person with the illness needs. They need that support and that relationship. So try to find ways before you get to, utter frustration. Find ways to kind of curb that, so that you're not, feeling as angry or upset, and that you can keep the open lines of communication there with your loved one. So this was really the last thing in the last article that I was going through. There are some overlaps that I think are good for both the patient and the caregiver to understand, because both of you are really going for the same purpose. It's to try to give support and understanding to the patient. As the patient, we understand that we need that. The caregiver is trying to find ways to give that. So, having a caregiver understand a lot of these things will, hopefully lead to a relationship that stays strong, stays supportive, and that you can navigate this illness together instead of, each feeling alone. So I hope everybody was able to get something out of this podcast. I know that there were some repetitive things, but again, it kind of falls into that area where it's needed on both sides, so it really bears repeating. Try to find some resources for a caregiver. I don't think I saw it in any of the notes that I took, but see if you speak with like a social services, Department of Health and Social Services in your area. I've seen some places call it the the Department of Health and Human Services. Some call it the Department of Health and Social Services. So just find that agency in your local area, see if they offer any type of respite care, and that would be having someone come in, whether it's once a week, once a month, or just on an as-needed basis. That gives the primary caregiver a little bit of a break, because that can be needed. So, depending on where you live, things might be different. So just, go through, the Department of Health and Social Services website for your state, see if there's any way that they can offer with assistance for respite care, and that would take the burden off sometimes as well. Now, next week I will be looking at allergies and understanding food allergies, because I have some food allergies, and while my reaction is not severe, such as anaphylaxis, I do know that there are a lot of allergies that can cause that. But even without anaphylaxis, food allergies can really be detrimental to a person. I have one of my allergies. My doctor said that the more that the exposure happens, so say if I've eaten it again since the last time I had it, each time the reaction could get more and more severe. So I really wanted to take a look at things that we can do both to protect others who may have allergies, and how we can ourselves better understand it. To give you an example, when I first started to get my infusion, I was told we could bring snacks and everything, because I would be there for at least 4 hours at the time. And I started to put stuff in my bag and realized I had peanuts, something that had peanuts. And I know that's a allergen that can be pretty severe if someone has a reaction. And just kind of looked at what I had, if anything might cause a reaction, and put it away. Now, there's no way, of course, that I can cover every single food group, but I know that, or knew that peanuts could be very, very severe. So that's kind of what I want to focus on. Not necessarily that no one ever takes anything out with peanuts, but just if someone does tell you they have a food allergy, what to expect, ways that we can cope having food allergies. I do know, at least with my illness, a lot of people do have allergies related to it. So this might be a two-parter for the allergies. One, getting to understand what allergies are, and then two, some things that we need to recognize when someone's having an attack, or anything that needs to be done for us as individuals or for the person who has the allergy. So I really look forward to exploring this topic and looking at the ways it can affect individuals. In my in the description, I'll also leave my contact information. So if you have any ideas on, different topics that you would like to discuss, or if you would like to actually, be on a podcast to discuss your illness, your views, your points, experiences, things like that, my information will be linked in the description. So I want to wish everybody a healthy and happy week, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.